All right, let's pick up on one of our top stories, the possibility that some may usher in the new year with no water. The Minister of Water and Sanitation, Nomvula Mokonyane, has released a list of 30 municipalities in arrears. They have until the 8th of December to settle their bills amounting to over 10 billion rand. Otherwise, government warning that the water will be cut off. Well, this comes amidst various water crises in the country. Let's speak to Professor Anthony Turton, water policy strategist via Skype. Professor, thank you for being with us. So there's a culture of non-payment. Government has to do something, but the end users say, you know, some of them have been paying, but they pay to the municipality who doesn't pass the money on. How do we deal with a situation like this?
Sure, it's an extremely complicated issue. We've allowed a culture of impunity to grow over a long period of time. People have been allowed to get away with just doing whatever they wanted to. And now, of course, it's crunch time. I'm not sure how you can just cut off the supply of water because there's all kinds of legal issues associated with the human rights to water. And there are also other legal issues, should a fire break out or something like that, who's actually liable when there's not enough water to feed the fire engines. So we are actually in a very difficult, almost a no man's land now, where it's uncharted territory.
Constitutionally, you can't cut off. You can only throttle, as they call it. Is that correct?
Yes, they throttle it off. But what then happens is that your buildings that are on higher ground get throttled back. I mean, I happen to live on a very high piece of ground, and I'm one of the first buildings to always lose my water whenever one of these things happen. And you have a situation where ordinary residents are paying their rates and taxes, but because the municipality that they pay to doesn't then pay it over to Rand Water, then the entire community gets punished. So this has been happening now in the Brits area around Harrisburg Dam for some time now, where people are paying their rates and taxes, but they still get cut back. So it's just not a very satisfactory solution, but something clearly has to be done about it.
Is there a better solution, going directly to the end users somehow, or heading towards that?
I think if I look at this thing in a cold analytical way, I think what's happening now is you're getting a domino effect of systemic failure across various parts of the economy, and it's a culmination of things that started with a billing crisis, where various municipalities were unable to collect the revenues due to them. Often they would have outrageous accounts that would be sent out. I know of some people that have not ever received water bills for many years. So the revenue is not always being collected. So in general, there's just a mess out there when it comes to the way that municipalities have handled their finances. And unfortunately, now the chickens have come home to roost. Now, what might well be happening at some point in time is at least attempt to privatize some of the value chain. How far that will go, I don't know, because there are all sorts of legal impediments in the way for that to take place.
The switching off and on, or the throttling even, affects what you're very concerned about is the actual supply, the pipes that feed the water anyway.
There are many unintended consequences of doing that, because the way that your water reticulation systems are engineered is to have they're always high pressure systems, and they have to have a high pressure inside the pipe for various design reasons. Now, inside your pipe, you get a biofilm, a form of biological material that grows. Now, as soon as you throttle back your pressure, some of your pipes could start collapsing, or you actually get a vacuum in some of the pipes because the high-lying areas now start running dry. This then starts introducing air into the system, so you have air hammer when you repressurize the system. This now is almost like a hammer being swung through these pipes as it goes. It comes back under pressure. It starts ripping off the biofilm from the inside of these pipes. So you get all sorts of unintended consequences from doing this. It's absolutely not a way to manage your infrastructure, but it's just an indication of what I'm calling systemic failure in different parts of the national economy.
And what is the overall state of the water infrastructure? And I ask this as someone who is affected by one of the biggest leaks in history. It's being built, and there was no water in parts of Sandton, northern parts of Johannesburg for 48 hours.
Well, that's a good example because, it's amazing to think that city planners have allowed a solid waste dump to be built on top of a water main. So they've had to mine down 35 meters through garbage to repair a main. Now, that is a planning issue. That should never have been allowed to happen in the first place. But the reality is that this is what's happened all over the show. So for the last 20 years, we haven't had central planning. Or 20 years ago, our infrastructure was already old. I recently did some work about 2 or 3 years ago for one of the major water boards, looking at their infrastructure, and we found there that some of the parts are almost 100 years old. So, we in general are dealing with old infrastructure. We've hammered it into the ground, haven't looked after it at all, and now we're abusing it even further. So I'm afraid that just, we're in a situation where it's almost unpredictable as to what's going to happen next.
Professor, we're having a very bleak conversation. What can you advise, practical steps, policy-wise, and in terms of the municipalities that aren't paying?
Well, in terms of the municipalities that aren't paying, I think what we have to do is we have to just draw the line in the sand now, where we can no longer tolerate this culture of impunity that's been allowed to grow. And I'm promoting at the moment what I call this a new paradigm of abundance. And in that paradigm of abundance, it is actually underpinned by technology and capital that enables us to upgrade our infrastructure to world-class standards by using absolutely cutting-edge technology. But capital can only come into that space if there is policy reform. So this whole policy reform thing is absolutely critical. And if we don't get that policy reform, then I'm afraid that space will remain uninvestable, a factor made even more difficult by the ratings agency downgrade, which means that effectively many of these municipalities or the government itself is no longer capable of raising capital on the bond market. So, we really are in very, very, very difficult place now, and I don't want to be a bringer of bad news because this culture of abundance is technically quite feasible, and in fact, I think we can develop this into something like the Marshall Plan, whereby we modernize our entire economy by massive expenditure into your water infrastructure, which puts thousands and thousands of unemployed people back to meaningful and honest work.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Anthony Turton, on the line for us. Now